Hi everyone and welcome. This is the 5th Google Hangout session of the Pixel Project's 5th annual International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 14 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women, to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking, and to help us reveal the first mystery celebrity male role model portrait in our Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. I'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser a little later. We have lots and lots of exclusive author goodies. But if you want to find out more, meanwhile, about the Pixel Project, go to www.thepixelproject.net. So today we have a very special guest. We have a live discussion and a Q&A session with the fabulous fantasy author S.A. Chakraborty. Shannon is a speculative fiction writer from New York City. Her debut, The City of Brass, is the first book in the Devabad trilogy and has been shortlisted for the Locus, British Fantasy, and World Fantasy Awards. When she's not buried in books about Mughal miniatures and Abbasid political intrigue, she enjoys hiking, knitting, and recreating unnecessarily complicated medieval meals for her family. You can find Shannon online at www.sachakraborty.com or on Twitter at @sachakrabooks, where she likes to talk about history, politics, and Islamic art. Now, Shannon has very generously donated some absolutely gorgeous goodie bundles to the stash of author goodies we have set up as perks for donors on our Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. So there are two separate bundles. The first is the amazing Devabad Goodie Bundle, which is for US donors only. It contains one signed and personalized hardcover copy of The City of Brass, one signed and personalized hardcover copy of The Kingdom of Copper, and one swag set that Shannon has compiled is a bookmark, a signed book plate, a tattoo, and a character poster. Sorry, Shannon, were you doing a show and tell?
I was just trying to be helpful.
Okay, well, those are the books there next to Shannon. Very luckily, one lucky donor has already got it. We want to say thank you to Ariella North, who has snapped up this Devabad goodie bundle. And there is one more bundle, which is the City of Brass goodie bundle. Now, this one is available for donors worldwide. It contains one special edition paperback of The City of Brass, which has a bonus scene, and it's also signed and personalized, and one accompanying bookmark. So since Ariella has already taken up the Devabad goodie bundle, only the City of Brass goodie bundle is available, and there's only one of it. So if you're interested, go and donate, because once someone else snaps it up, it's gone forever. All of the funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to end violence against women, so please give generously. I'll be telling you how you can go get your hands on this later in the session and how you can help by donating, so stay tuned for that. And now Shannon is going to do a reading. I believe she's going to read from Kingdom of Copper, and then we're going to have a live discussion, a Q&A session. You can participate by asking Shannon your questions. You're watching this on YouTube. Type your questions on the right-hand side, the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And our moderator, Denisha, is going to relay the question to me, and I'll read the question to Shannon. Okay, so let me just switch to Shannon now, and she's going to do the reading. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, and hello to everyone watching. Thank you for spending your Saturday night with me and the Pixel Project. It means a lot to see people active and donating for such a good cause. So tonight I'm going to read from The Kingdom of Copper. It is book 2 in the Devabad trilogy, and it's a short scene, and I picked it because I wanted something that focused on the soft power of women in royal families and in politics. So you don't need to know too much when it starts, except that this is a ceremony at the palace, and Nahri is about to enter the women's tent. When I find my page. Okay. Its opulence was a mockery of the tent the nomadic Gezeris would have once called home. Stunning hand-loomed rugs in a riot of colors lay thick upon the ground, and an illusionist had conjured up a constellation of miniature fireworks to swirl and sparkle overhead. Fire burned in wide, open golden lamps. The jinn had a strong aversion to the small, closed ones, often used as slave vessels by the Ifrit. The tent was warm and packed. Nahri slipped out of her chador, handing it off to a waiting attendant, and blinking as her eyes adjusted to the crowded, firelit interior. Past the bustle of servants and guests lingering near the entrance, she caught a glimpse of Queen Hatset and Princess Zainab holding court on a raised marble dais scattered with ebony and gold cushions. Cursing the etiquette that required her to greet them first, Nahri made her way across the floor. She was determined to ignore the raised eyebrows she knew her dress would attract, so she refused to look at the other women. Which meant she realized too late that many of them had pulled their various shaylas and veils over their heads. The reason why sat between his mother and sister. It took Nahri a moment to recognize the finely dressed young man in the robes of an Ayanle noble as the traitorous former friend she'd contemplated murdering in her garden a few days ago. Gone were the filthy traveling robe and ragged gutra. Over a rich black dishdasha trimmed with pale moonstone beads, Ali wore a grass-green robe patterned in silver ikat, a cheerfully colored garment deeply uncharacteristic of the taciturn prince. A beautiful silver turban crowned his head, wrapped in the Gezeri style that revealed the copper relic bolted to his ear. Ali looked equally taken aback by the sight of Nahri, his shocked gaze traveling from her uncovered head down her bare arms. She heard him take a sharp breath, and she bristled. Given Ali's conservative views, he probably thought the dress was even more inappropriate than Nisreen had. Banu Nahida, Hatset greeted her, beckoning Nahri closer with a hand that sparkled with golden rings. There you are. Come, join us. Nahri approached, bowing her head as she brought her hands together. Peace be upon you all, she said, in her best attempts at ingratiating politeness. And upon you peace, dear daughter. Hatset gave her a warm smile. The royal women looked stunning as usual. Hatset wore a silk abaya dyed in saffron and crimson, the fabric shimmering like a flame under a midnight-colored shayla trimmed in Gezeri pearls. Zainab, who could drive a man to her knees dressed in an ill-fitting sack, was clad in a gown that looked like a waterfall had come to life and decided to worship her. A cascade of teal, emerald, and cobalt blue, held together by a collar of real lotus flowers. I was beginning to fear something might have happened to you when you didn't arrive with your husband. The words were said with far too much intent, but Nahri wasn't surprised. There seemed to be very little Hatset didn't know about the domestic happenings of the palace. Nahri had no doubt a few of her maids were in the queen's employ, and that news of her argument with Mutazir had already been relayed. But Nahri was not discussing her marital woes with this woman. She feigned a smile. Forgive my tardiness. I had a patient. Hatset golden eyes twinkled. No apology necessary. She gestured to Nahri's dress. That is quite lovely. A little different, to be sure, but very beautiful. Her voice took on a teasing tone. Alu, doesn't she look pretty? She asked her son. Ali's gaze was darting everywhere, but at Nahri. Yes, he stammered. I should go. The men will be expecting me. Hatset grabbed him by his wrist. Remember to talk to people, and about things other than hadith and economics, for the love of God, Ali Zaid. Tell some exciting stories about Amgazira. Ali rose to his feet. Nahri hated to admit such a thing, but he looked striking in his new clothes, the beautifully dyed robe highlighting his haughty features and luminous dark skin. She supposed that's what happened when you let your mother dress you. He kept his gaze on the floor as he passed her. In peace, he said softly. Go jump in the lake, she whispered under her breath in Arabic. She saw him tense, but he didn't stop. Hatset smiled as she watched him walk away, her expression both proud and fiercely protective. Of course she's proud. She's probably been conspiring to get him back here for years. Nahri had been turning over in her head the conversation she'd overheard between Muntazir and Jamshid since her run-in with Ali. She wondered if there was any truth to her husband's concerns about the deadly intentions of the mother she now knew was Hatset. The queen's gaze shifted back to Nahri. Dear one, why are you still standing? Sit, she commanded, gesturing to the cushion next to Zainab. My daughter has already accidentally knocked aside the tent panel in front of us to improve our view. You always hide yourself away at these things. She nodded at the platters surrounding them. I've had the kitchens bring out some vegetarian dishes for you. Nahri went from baffled to suspicious in one fell swoop. Hatset was clearly up to something. So much so that the queen was barely attempting to hide it with her question about Muntazir and her exuberant friendliness. And her rather obvious comment to Nahri about her dress. Nahri's cheeks suddenly burned. Oh no, she was not letting herself get dragged between the estranged brothers that way. She had enough problems of her own. But neither could she be rude. Hatset was the queen, wealthy, powerful, and with as much of an iron fist when it came to the harem as her husband held over the city. Daevabad's royal harem was enormously influential. Here, marriages between their world's most powerful families were debated, and here, posts and contracts were given out that changed lives, all under the watchful eye of the Jinn Queen. So when Hatset again gestured to the cushion next to Zainab, Nahri sat. And that's my section.
Thanks. That was pretty cool. Okay, so we have 14 people watching, which is pretty good.
Oh.
And we do have a few questions coming in sporadically. Hopefully we get more. But I think what I'm going to do is ask some of my questions and then ask some of the fan questions that are coming in. Okay, so that was a really cool section that you read, and which it really brings us into my first question, which is about female characters. So you have a lot of memorable and fantastic female characters and protagonists, like Nari. They are resourceful and independent, and Nari herself goes through a really tough and interesting journey of self-discovery. And like all other female characters, they're all really complex. They have agency. They are also human and flawed. In fact, Nari herself interacts with many male characters who do try to control her in some way, but she always stands her ground when she thinks she has to. So my first question would be, what or who are your inspirations for all of your female characters?
Honestly, just real life. I mean, my work is very inspired by history. And when I first started writing it and putting it out there, I wanted to give some voice and agency to women in history who I think a lot of times, the lay understanding is that they had no agency, that, for the vast majority of history, most women just had miserable lives and everything was terrible. And don't get me wrong, I'm not going to come here and be like an apologist for the medieval ages, but I also think, people are human and people have made lives for themselves all through centuries all around the world. And I really wanted to take aspects of anecdotes and everything I had read about real women and bring that in. For Nahri, I think that was my first starting point. How many times did I hear from people tell me, oh, women in the Middle East didn't live like that. They've never been doctors. They've never been this. They've never been that. Muslim women are not allowed to do anything. And I just feel like, well, I have a book from an actual professional who talks about how women were midwives or women who were married to doctors and physicians treated female patients. I mean, these aren't things we make up. They're there in the sources. Women were scholars. They had lives. Like, I'm not gonna say, oh, things were perfect for everyone. Not at all. But these women did exist, and I wanted to show that. And even with book 2, it's interesting. I felt like when I wrote City of Brass, I wanted to show Nahri sort of, okay, the idea of what you said, interacting with male characters and the different ways she could do so and have different relationships and different ways of interacting with men without always being afraid. This, the trope we have a bit in fantasy. And then, it's interesting because reading back on it afterwards, I kind of felt like I did not have enough female characters in that book. So when I got to the Kingdom of Copper, I kind of wanted to challenge myself to really, add more female characters in, make them well-rounded, make them have their own interactions with Nahri. And one of the ways I did that was by looking at the idea, sort of trying to fix the common understanding we have of the harem in the West, which is that it's just this like place where just men locked away all their pretty concubines.
Yeah.
Or even the idea people will be like, oh yes, they had politics, and then they tell you a story of it's just all scheming wives and concubines like murdering each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not all it was brought up to. Like this is where families were raised and children lived and people had lives and agency. And in many of these societies that my sort of background is in the medieval Middle East and Indian Ocean world in general. And in many of these worlds, men were princes and kings were extremely reliant on the women in their lives. Their wives, their sisters, their mothers, their power rose and fell with them. And not just the idea of, oh, I'll try to get my son to be caliph and then I'll have all this money. But in the fact that these men would go to them as counselors. What do you think I should do? Can you talk to this one's wife, son, daughter? It was very much like a family rule. And I really wanted to bring in the idea and show a royal mother and sister, very wholesome characters in a way, clever, brilliant women, and how they could use their own power.
Was it difficult to sort of break these stereotypes and tropes when you were writing these female characters? To write a female character with agency who deals with the world around her and may get involved in sexism and misogyny and violence against women and girls, and then also break a stereotype. Was that hard to manage?
Not really, because I think I got into this, and I'll be honest, like I when I'm thinking about writing and breaking stereotypes, I'm really not concerned about the reader who's going to have a misogynistic reaction to my characters. They're not my audience. I don't really care. So yes, when I get those emails and comments at panels and everything, is it annoying? It's irritating, yes, but I feel like, the function of some of that stuff is to kind of distract you and have you yell about that and get upset about it, when I'm just like, well, I could continue to do it and give my book to readers who will appreciate that and enjoy it and just do it. I mean, I think that was like my choice with a lot of what I was writing was, do I take this out because for issues of sexism, racism, cultural understanding, or do I just put the book out there and just kind of be like, readers will get it or not get it, but not worry about pandering to a certain audience of, oh, I want my women to be likable, that kind of thing. It wasn't worth it.
Yeah, that was actually my next question. If you got, well, obviously you have got sort of flack for you trying not making your characters likable enough, because somehow a woman has to be liked all the time, right? So,
I don't. Yeah, I'll let you go. Yeah.
No, go on.
No, it's funny because you're dealing, like, I'm writing about fairly traumatic political events, and people who have, especially not she's gone through a horrific upbringing in some way. She was orphaned. She hasn't had anybody around her. Anybody she grew close to would see her abilities and be terrified of them. I mean, she's had to be a thief to survive. A person like this, and then thrown into this political debacle where she feels like she's going to be killed or used, she's not going to be a likable person. People don't survive those situations. Like, I think anybody going through plot and drama, which is the reason we read novels, is dealing with some stuff. And I would rather write them realistically than have them just kind of placidly be happy and joyful and calm all the time, instead of just, yelling at people, saying something cruel that they don't mean. I think people are flawed, and we should show that in our characters.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And you've answered my next question as well, which was going to be, yeah, you're good. Yeah. So I was going to bring up the not like other girls trope, because a lot of the time you see these female characters who are, like, I'm tough and independent and skillful, and I can, use a sword and kill all these people. And yeah, but girly stuff is not for me. But girls can be anything they want to be. You can be feminine and you can be tough and independent and intelligent as well. So obviously you chose to write your characters this way. What was the reason? Why did you choose to write your characters this way? And again, was it hard for people to accept them?
I chose to write my characters that way just because I wanted everyone to feel well-rounded and different. And, we could have a character in the second book. on one end of the spectrum, Akisa, who is a warrior and one of the best in her generation, and is, I guess, you could be like, oh, she's taken on masculine qualities. She's described usually wearing men's dress. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have Zainab, who is princess. She's sheltered. She's beautiful. Everybody talks about how beautiful she is and how, well posed and everything. But she is also brilliant. And she uses her own political acumen to save her brother's life and his hide at certain points in the book. And we have a character like that. We have someone like Nahri, who is very much is the heroine of the book, is brave, saves the day. And it's not necessarily by picking up a sword. She's smart. She wants to be a doctor. She doesn't want to go out there and hit people with a sword. She wants, she likes what she does. She very much likes doing surgery. She likes treating patients. So I really wanted to show different aspects. I wanted to show a strong mother figure in Hatset. I think in fantasy, we tend to lose a lot of mothers. They die. Everybody died. Yeah. And I wanted to show someone and show that she was a political power, but also her kindness, that, she's guiding her children to be not just, players in I guess the political Game of Thrones, but genuinely good people. Yeah, so I just wanted to have some well-rounded characters. And in terms of perception, again, it's kind of hard because this is my second book. Like, I don't read reviews anymore. So, I think at least from what I've seen, the perception has been positive. But again, I think especially as a woman writing female characters, I'm just not concerned with whether or not certain people are going to like them who are never going to like female characters like that.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I think we should go to some fan questions because they've been waiting for a while. So our first question is from Jasmine Nayak, who asks, she says, these books are in a world greatly inspired by Islamic and Middle Eastern styles, but even as someone who came into it fairly raw, that wasn't confusing. Was this difficult to manage?
I don't know because I came into it knowing a lot of that stuff. But you know what? It's interesting. When I wrote the books, and I did not mean to write books when I started writing these books. I was actually working in an entirely different field. My career and my academic life had kind of fallen by the wayside. I had wanted to go to graduate school to study the medieval Islamic world. A recession happened. I was just honestly like working as a secretary, trying to keep a roof over my head. And I felt lost, and I wanted to do something with the work that I had studied, the things that I had hoped to go back to. So I still had all these books, this research. So I kind of started writing this own little fan fiction world in my head where I kind of mixed up a lot of what I had read with magic and with stories, and had kind of been like, okay, if I made this alternate world of Jinn, how that would work. So that was already there in the story. And then at the point where I was trying to get the books published, because I did not think I was going to get the books published, because if you try to publish something in 2016 based on something called a caliphate, people didn't really want to hear that. Yeah. But by the time I got that, I mean, I'm Muslim myself, I'm a convert, and I wanted, if I was going to put these books out there, I wanted them to resonate with my community so that they could read them and enjoy them and be like, oh, that's cool, that's in there. And I was really fortunate to work with a publisher and an editor who were completely supportive of that. So when we went through the book, there was no taking out of these things. It was more like if somebody was confused, we found a way to explain it in the text. And, we didn't keep things out. And I think, it's interesting because I wanted to work with a world that was, it's political epic fantasy. It's meant to be dense at a certain point. But I didn't think it was overly confusing, and it's sometimes for this book and for other books like it, sometimes when I hear, people's reactions, so like, I can't read that, I can't pronounce any of those long words. And I just want to be like, if you can deal with, you can deal with Dara and Nahri, if you can read like Jacqueline apostrophe, like heroine sex of like house this, of family this, and it goes on, they got a title like this, you can handle Ali. Like, yeah. I just, again, like, it was kind of in keeping with that stuff. I was writing about a community in a world that I did have some part in, but was also not mine. And I wasn't going to really water things down or take things out. That seemed disrespectful to me. So I kept them in, and hopefully they're mostly understandable. Yeah, and it makes things more interesting, really, to see. It makes it all makes it richer. That's what I want to say. I have an important message
to you from Jasmine Nayak, who asked that question just now, because we were talking about Nari and how strong she is and how she's had to fight to survive and everything. And she says, I was homeless when I started reading City of Brass, and her anger and survival instincts were something I desperately identified with in that time versus waiting for someone to save her. And I think she also goes on to she made another comment later and said that books really helped her through a really tough time. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that. That really touches me. I'm glad that helps.
Okay, so one more question. I'm trying to find. There's so many questions coming in. Okay, so Confessions of a Book Addict asks, will you be at BookCon this year?
I won't be at BookCon this year. I'm going to be moving in the spring, so I'm trying to keep my schedule a little light. But if you are in New York around June, I'm going to be doing an event, and I'll have more information later. I think it's June 10th at the Yorkville branch of the New York Public Library. I'll be doing an event and a reading, and we'll be selling stuff. So I will be active in a place in New York City at least once.
Okay. Okay, two questions which are sort of similar. First is from Jasmine Naik again. She says, food is such an important aspect of your world building. Did you make a lot of recipes to explore them? And do you find things after drafting, or do you already know which ones to use? And Ayana Gray says, your books are incredibly well researched and vivid. What is the process for drafting these kinds of stories? So sort of about research and what kind of background you go to.
So first, in terms of the food one, I actually have a hard time picking what will be in the book. I mean, I love to cook, hence the whole biography thing about my medieval meals thing. I have, some English translations of these old cookbooks. Actually, culinary culture was a huge part of the medieval world, and there were culinary competitions in it anyway between the fancy people. This was just something that was in the culture, and we have so many of these recipes passed down, and they're fantastic. So I like to recreate the ones that I can, and just in general shove as much eating and drinking and everything into the books, because I think it brings, food is such a huge part of human society. Anything that when you're world building, you have to bring that stuff in. I mean, it's a huge part of culture. So I just try to put in as much as possible. In terms of research, everybody asks me this, and it's funny because I just did so much of this beforehand, and so much of this is like, I just like to read history books. So it's kind of like I'm in a good position when I'm drafting that if I don't know something, I usually know where to turn. Or I can write a note to myself, okay, look this up, and then the next round move ahead. But I keep reading about this stuff. So I'll be reading things and I'll go, oh, 2 books down the line, this would be a really cool setting. So it's kind of something that just informs the process as I go along.
Okay. We have a comment from Kenzie Lyons. She says, I just finished City of Brass and it has become one of my favorite novels ever. It was so intriguing and unique. I adored the setting and the characters, and I can't wait to start the Kingdom of Copper, and I'm struggling trying to pick which editions to get.
First, thank you. I mean, I think Kingdom of Copper now, it's the same. I have the UK one. Do I have pictures? Yes, I do. This was me trying to prepare for this thing as I drop stuff. I have the UK one and I have the US one. Cool. They're the same text though. I mean, they have slightly different maps and everything, but they're the same text. So if you're asking me, I mean, I wrote Nahri. Whatever one is cheaper.
Yeah, makes sense.
Or I'll do the proper author thing and see if maybe an indie bookstore has it. But yeah, otherwise, whatever one is strikes your fancy in terms of the cover.
Or you could donate and then get a signed and personalized copy.
Yeah, yes, that for City Brass. Kingdom of Copper I don't have up there yet. Yeah. But yes, for City Brass, I have the signed copy and I will write your name in it and I'll come up with a fancy note and you can have that.
Okay, now let's I'm gonna ask some more of my questions. And we were talking about a lot of female characters just now. You also have male characters in your story, obviously. And though there are misogynistic characters in your books who are basically products of patriarchal society, the male and female relationships between the main characters are generally quite equitable. Some of your male characters are definitely respectful to women, to their thoughts and decisions. What would you like your readers, especially you have some young readers, what would you like them to take away from these relationships?
Well, that was very important for me. Actually, especially when I was writing the book, so much so that afterwards I was like, did I really do enough female and female relationships? I was so focused on let me show the different ways, we can interact with each other and not have it be this fantasy trope of just this woman who's like, set upon by all the men she interacts with. And it just lives in a world of constant threat of sexual assault. I mean, I think we have that in epic fantasy. And I don't want to like judge other authors and say like everybody can write what they want, but it was very important to me that I wrote an epic fantasy that I felt like people who had survived circumstances like that didn't need to read it and feel overwhelmed by just these constant concepts of rape and the threat of this. And I didn't want Nahri at any point in these stories to feel like she was about to be sexually assaulted. Doesn't happen in the trilogy. And so that was important for me. And then when crafting how she deals with the men in her life, again, I wanted her to have different kinds of relationships with different sorts of people, that she's not really afraid. She's still trying to see how she can con them and deal with them and have a friendship with somebody that's built on more than just like them checking each other out, but like actually have interests in each other's lives and worlds and things in common. And I wanted to delve into a bit of the idea, even just toxic masculinity and how that works with characters. It's funny because I think in many ways, the men in the Daevabad trilogy are a bit more of an emotional mess than the women. The women kind of know the world they live in, and that they're just like, no, I gotta keep a lid on that to survive. Whereas like the men are like, I mean, there's a scene I wrote in City of Brass that I love, which is a sparring scene between the two main male characters. And I mean, they might as well just be like slapping each other and insulting each other because it has nothing to do with fighting or practicing at a certain point. It's two men who are like, both wrong in many ways. They're just, they're yelling at each other and they're being pretty like racist and bigoted towards each other. And it's a mess. And I wanted to kind of show that like, men could have that side, or also on the contrary, men could be soft and cry and emotional and not have that, be like this terrible, horrible thing. But like, I wanted to, especially with Ali's character in books 1 and 2, I wanted to show a man who thoroughly respected the women in his life, who valued their counsel, who when he got upset, he would talk to his mother, he would cry, and he's still this strong hero. That, and then we can show men have different kinds of dimensions. In terms of toxic masculinity doing things wrong, I wanted to show how that had also warped. I don't want to like completely spoil things, but towards the end of the City of Brass, there's one male character. You're nodding. I wanted to take in the idea of what happens when you're so like, I must save the damsel in distress. You stop listening to the so-called damsel in distress. You do something that will lose you the damsel in distress forever when she had the better idea. And I just, I kind of wanted to have that idea. It's always, the man races in to save the day. What if she can save the day, says to it very clearly, I can save the day, I got this. And, just the guy has been raised in a world where just, no, I know what is better for you. I swear this is going to be better for you. And it all goes to hell. So.
Yeah, don't we all know men like that though? Yes. So speaking of toxic masculinity, like you said, Ali sort of, he breaks the stereotype, as it were, of the epic fantasy male who he works towards a more peaceful resolution. Do you think reframing how stories describe men away from this toxic stereotype towards complexity and vulnerability can be one of the ways that science fiction fantasy authors can break away from toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Oh, absolutely. I think, it's funny because I write in a genre that I think a lot of people are always like, oh, that's escapist. You're reading that to get away from the real world. But people read stories because they're looking for mirrors and understanding of themselves, and even to escape into something, but also, to have it mean something to you. I think we tell stories of, especially, in times like this, of how to survive certain things. This is why we have certain aspects of Star Wars that are popular, of like, resisting and fighting the power. And I think we gravitate towards that. I think that's a very human impulse. We've always told stories about heroes and about fixing things and saving the day. And I think examining the kinds of characters we put into those stories is great. I think for a long time, there's been sort of this idea of like, you know, the single, especially in the Western idea of storytelling, is very much like this single person, the loner, will ride out to save the day. And with the David Budd trilogy, I kind of wanted to break apart from that. I very much wanted to break at the idea of monarchy and the idea of the, you know, the rightful heir, the rightful family. I do not think highly of monarchies. I think they should be broken down and replaced with, you know, ruling councils of, you know, people who are fairly elected. And I think even in fantasy, we can look at some ideas of how to make peace and make the world a better spot and just give some people some hope, so that if, yes, they're picking up your book to be escapist during dark times, they can read something and maybe see, even if it's just fictional and it involves wizards and dragons, a way and a light to a better world.
Do you think eventually this alpha male stereotype is going to be phased out, and do you think writers have been like trying to phase it out in recent times?
I don't know that something like that can be phased out. I mean, I don't know if I'm a pessimist, or it's just, I think there's a certain point of, you know, I'm sure some people on the other side of this would listen to me saying this and be like, you're trying to censor all these type of things. Listen, you want your book with your alpha male, that's fine. You want to write the book with the alpha male, that's fine. I think we're all allowed to have very different reading tastes and enjoy what we like. I think it becomes part of the discussion when you go, okay, we all have something to read, but why aren't those stories and those voices being pushed to the front as much as some of the other ones? Mm-hmm. And I think that's when we can kind of discuss, if all of the books are, you know, male authored about men, which they're not anymore, you know, that becomes an issue. But it's interesting because even when I still hear people discussing sort of the pop culture understanding of fantasy fiction, it's still all male names that are coming up. It's mostly white male names. Meanwhile, if you look at what's actually coming out and winning awards and the discussion in the field, it's a lot of women. It's a lot of women of color. And I wonder sometimes where the discrepancy starts, in that the majority of the population, and this is like anecdotal, but seems to think of fantasy as this, and those of us in the genre field think of fantasy as this. And I think getting those things to close the distance a bit more is where the work needs to be done.
Okay. I'll come back to that point later, but I want to ask, before I forget, an important question about consent. So in fantasy books, the line between consent and coercion is not very clear sometimes. You can see this in epic fantasy, in urban fantasy, paranormal romance sometimes. Do you think it's an issue that writers in the genres have started tackling more successfully in recent years?
Consent in terms of like sexual relationships?
Yeah, well, yes, mainly that, but any kind of consent really, because all consent is important. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. You know, that's an interesting question, and I don't really think so. I mean, I think like a lot of, you know, like if I'm thinking, okay, a lot of books, it's like, you know, you have your cue to the romantic moment. People don't usually stop and be like, can I kiss you? And I think it's becoming, you know, people are starting to say that, but I don't really know that I could really put my finger on, like, do I think most people are doing this? I don't have a lot of, you know, like I try to think there's one issue, yes, in the City of Brass in terms of consent, and that is completely violated, and it's a turning point of the novel. But, you know, even I guess for my own books, I'm writing about a world where people are kind of set apart a little bit more. So I haven't really delved into it as much. But I think it's something that absolutely, again, it's a normalizing of some of these things that I think we can all help with. When we're putting it in our fiction and we're putting it in our stories, that it's just, yes, it's a normal part in life to not, you know, assault someone, or that's not romantic, or, you know, what is romantic and what is nice and healthy, I think, and we can show that in stories.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to ask some questions about sort of stories and your writing process, because we got a lot of questions about that from your fans as well. So Jessica Elder says, "Hi Shannon. What were the first ideas that came to mind when you started to get ideas of the series? What are different plot lines that changed and first characters that were developed?"
Nahri, Ali, and Dara, all of them. I mean, it was funny because it started as just this world of short stories about magic and about this different land. And then I started being like, I should make a book out of this. And the 3 of them came quite quickly. They changed a lot. They changed a lot. Dara changed a lot. As you know, even just as I grew in a storyteller and trying to think about different things. But it was really sort of, I felt like the series took off when I wrote that first scene, and it remains in City of Brass, of Nahri conning the 2 Bashas. And it was kind of just like the narrative took off from that. And once I kind of got in the mind of this woman who had survived and was a thief, but also had this brilliant talent, everything kind of just started coming around.
Okay. Makes sense. Okay, Kenzie Lyons asks, and is there a specific reason you chose to write about ancient Egypt?
I don't necessarily write about ancient Egypt. I write about 18th century Egypt, which I think is probably the question. And it is actually, I wanted it to both feel kind of like a portal fantasy, but one that took place in our world. So the Jinn in the story have very much made their society and their civilization building off of the humans around them. But in like recent centuries, they've kind of stopped doing that and they've withdrawn. So I wanted the feel of Daevabad in the magical world to feel like the medieval world. So whereas Nahri, coming from 18th century Egypt, felt like that was a little bit back of a step in time. You know, they don't really have the same understanding of modern weapons or some of these concepts and everything, so that it felt like that. And I also wanted to put it, you know, even just the ideas of like different kinds of colonialism and oppression. I said it when the French invaded Egypt. And that is going to start a whole different whirlwind of what Egypt, who had been ruled by foreigners, quite frankly, since the ancient Greeks, the Macedonians, you know, I wanted to, okay, now European rule is coming and things are about to get really bad. So it's kind of, it doesn't necessarily, the novels don't necessarily touch on that, but I felt like framing it in that way of different kinds of oppression and different kinds of colonialism and occupation, that was why it was kind of important for me to start it at that point.
Okay. We have a pretty interesting question from Zaina Rehan, who asked, in writing your villains, what were your biggest inspirations and favorite villainous or morally gray characters you've written?
Oh, that I've written? Oh, that's hard. One of them is a huge spoiler, and I'm just going to not say it.
Okay.
And it's I think a character I wrote hedges on a villain where I feel like a lot of my readers disagree. But I will say I like writing villains, but I like writing really complicated villains. I think there's a place, again, this is like every reader and writer can have, you know, what they enjoy. But for me, I like the idea, this sounds terrible saying you like it, but I don't think villains think they're villains in their own heads. And when I took the idea of Ghassan, who is completely a tyrant, I mean, without a doubt, I wanted to write a character who absolutely is a tyrant, does terrible things, but who in his soul and heart probably truly does think this is best for Daevabad. You know, he doesn't necessarily do it, oh, to get power for myself, to get money for myself. I think he has ingested the poison that we find out his own father, you know, served up to him of, if I do not rule this way, my people will all kill each other. Or if I do not rule this way, if people think I show softness, they will take down me and they will take down my family and my people. You know, it's the idea of rule of fear. You know, you have to hold on tight because otherwise everyone will fall apart or they'll come after you and yours. So I wanted to have that aspect so that he does terrible things throughout all of the novels. And I will say I very much enjoyed the ending of The Kingdom of Copper. But at the same time, you know, you understood why, and that he shows, he games his children. They're incredibly important political pawns, but at the same time, you can see it kind of hurts him, you know, that he loves them in a way. I think what was really fun to write with Ghassan was his relationship with Ali. And just the idea of what it would be like to be this sort of dictator and slowly watch your son, your favorite child, your baby in many ways, just grow into this threat. And what do you do with that? You know, your whole life and your whole political process is there will be no threats to Daevabad. They will be crushed. what do you do when it's your son and you love him and you're just trying anything to be like, you need to understand, stop, convincing people to rebel, stop believing this. Like, I need you to believe this and fall in line so I don't have to kill you.
Yeah.
I really liked writing that relationship. There's a scene in The City of Brass when they're out on top of the palace and they're looking over the city, and Ghassan thoroughly calls his son out on what he's been up to. And it was probably one of my top 3 scenes to write in the entire trilogy. It was a lot of fun of, just being like, I know what you're doing, boy. and it's going to stop.
Okay. Which brings me to a question from Colleen Hitch, who says, you can only fit so much into a book. Is it difficult to choose which scenes to cut and which to keep?
That gets easier. Because I think, especially, I'm writing commercial fiction, and I try to be very ruthless in that if something doesn't contribute to the plot, even if I love it, it goes. And I always tell other writers, when they're working on this, it can be great. It can be a great scene. It can be a great character. Might be the best writing you've done in a very long time. But if it doesn't fit the plot, cut it. And if it makes it easier, cut it and then paste it into another document. So if you want to use it again or use it one day, it gets a little easier. But I do think, you kind of got to be a little ruthless when you're, again, it depends on the story. Like, I'm trying to tell a story that, readers can't put the book down. And you can't always go and ramble sometimes, even if you're like, but it's a really cool ramble. You can't do it.
Yeah. Okay. We have a comment from Kenzie Lyons. She says, I totally agree with people enjoying what they want to enjoy within books, but I think there is a line where abuse is romanticized in a lot of literature I read, and it's disheartening, but I'm glad it's changing. It's true.
Yes, I completely agree. I think, and it's interesting, what kind of, even like relationships and necessarily certain fandoms will kind of coalesce around. And I think this is something to be concerned about. It's hard because I'm kind of one of those authors who's a big fan of the idea of the death of the author, which is a dark thing to say as an author. But I think, I don't necessarily think, I think when you've written the book, you've written the book, and you should kind of give it to the fans and let them have their thing and discuss that. But I do think sometimes, when you have certain ideas, I mean, there's a lot of, what's the line between like, oh, this is fan fiction and it's just fine, or wait a second, that's kind of like child molestation and that's a really dark thing to support. And I think that's something, the creator has got to think about, when people take it out of what you wrote and change it, it's different. But I think that's something to be concerned about. And it's even, my books are adult fantasy, but I think they kind of fall into the YA crossover. And I think especially, when you're writing for kids, you got to think about what you're putting into books and really, have the idea. I think it's interesting. When I wrote Dara and Nahri, I actually kind of aged up Nahri for that reason and tried to make certain things clear. And because I think we do have this concept of, the young virginal teenage woman who falls in love with a terrible man who's like, centuries old and is violent towards her and is abusive towards her. And what's kind of messed up is we're not the first ones to do that. I mean, a lot of folklore and folk tales is about the young woman and the beast, or the ancient warrior and all these things. So I don't know what that says about people, or what that says about certain tropes. But I think, we can all reflect on the kind of stories we're telling, the kind of stories we're handing our teenagers, and just try to do better.
Which brings me very nicely to my next question. So stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. How do you think authors can strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women and all these horrible things, while telling an engaging story without being pedantic or preachy?
I think if you're telling a good story and you're being true to certain concepts and thoughtful, you're not really coming across as pedantic and preachy. I think this completely depends on the kind of story you're telling, but I think it's not a hard thing to try to be a good person and try to put good things into the world. And I think, especially, this isn't something I want to speak to like the whole broad swath of literature, or even fantasy, because I think that's too hard to do. But I write epic fantasy. My field is known for, especially in the past, having a lot of sexual violence all over the page. I don't even have to mention certain authors. Everybody knows immediately what I'm talking about. And I think it's worth dissecting that without people jumping on you saying, you want to censor things. No, I don't. I just don't want a backdrop of sexual assault over everything. And it's the idea of story. Why are you using this? Are you just using this and adding in gratuitous details to be kind of have this like lecherous leering aspect? Are you using it to advance a male character's story who's not even there? I mean, how many, women being raped so that their men can go have a purpose do we have to see in fantasy before we think, hey, maybe we should not do that anymore? So I think people need to be open to this and have discussions about this. Listen, we all write problematic things. We all read problematic things. And I think being able to sit down with yourself sometimes and kind of just think about what you're doing, what other people are doing, have these discussions without everybody getting up in arms, which is, again, why sometimes I think it's good for creators to have a space and for readers to have a space, because I think as creators, we can kind of sit down with each other and go, don't do that, or think in a way that I think, we all sometimes have to have our own ways of saying this. But absolutely, I think there needs to be just a discussion and an understanding of the kind of material we put out in this world. And if you want to put out your very full of sexual assault fantasy book, listen, put it out. I don't want you to not be able to print it. But when people come to you, when readers are like, wow, this book is just full of rape for male characters to advance their agenda, don't be surprised. I think that's kind of the difference between there's censorship and there's critique. And if you're putting out these materials in the world and just kind of, I am doing this because nobody will say I can't do this, when everybody says, man, that was kind of messed up, you can't really be surprised.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you think then that stories that explore the theme that women can be empowered persons in their own right, that men should respect women, can help to stop violence against women in real life?
I don't know that it can. I think what we're consuming as media and what actually happens in real life, listen, there's the exact idea of what shapes the world around us in terms of rape culture, in terms of patriarchy. And I don't know, it's kind of those things, what do you say came first? Did the culture that we live in create those forms of media? Did those forms of media create the culture that we lived in? Or what I think is that they kind of, exist and support each other. And again, I think it just helps to have stories that question these things, because even for myself, I'll say it's really interesting to me. I put out City of Brass. I was like, I'm a female author. I wrote this feminist book with a strong female character. I wrote the book and I waited a year and I was like, I did not put enough female characters into that book. So it's like, you think to yourself, like, wait, like, how can I fix these things and understand these things? And I think as long as creators are kind of doing their duty, it's the idea of being a good citizen to the world. Okay, you have your job. How can you do what you do and shine a little light, make things a little better? I'm a storyteller. Hopefully I can write some stories that are, for my community, that show women in a different light, and maybe people take that.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of female characters, and you said you think you didn't write enough in the first book, but you wrote a lot in the second book, and they do have really interesting relationships. So, and this story definitely passes the Bechdel test with the depiction of the complex relationships between the women. Why do you think many science fiction fantasy authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are so many more things that women talk about besides men? And what could you suggest anything for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
I mean, it's kind of just like, what do people talk about? I mean, people talk about different things all the time. So it's that idea. I mean, are you shoving a male into the scene, or the discussion of a male into the scene where it doesn't have to do with it? And I think the reason the Bechdel test is good, I mean, it has a lot of flaws, but the reason it's good is because not only is it just like, oh, are they not talking, or you have two women who are talking about something other than a man, but if they don't have anything other than a man to talk about, that's a story flaw. You're kind of like, well, why? What have I done to these characters, or not given to these characters, that they don't have enough going on? That's kind of an idea of like, okay, you take a step back and think what's going on with your plot and with your character, that if you can't meet this, which is a fairly simple thing to meet, there might be something you need to fix further earlier in the story itself.
Okay. Now we were talking earlier about pigeonholing writers and you know, putting them into we were talking about this off air as well, about a lot of women getting sort of pigeonholed into YA when they're not really YA, and it's a weird thing of stereotyping female writers and writers of color. Now, geek culture in general has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated, despite, like you said, there are a lot of prominent and well respected and well known female authors. But there are still a lot of pretty hostile, misogynistic, sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks as well, whether it's in cons, online. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or TV or movies, more welcoming for women and girls, authors and fans?
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge question, and I don't know that I could really answer to all of it. It goes without saying that we know that aspects of geek culture, aspects of culture, are harmful to women, to non-binary people. This is something we're all trying to fix. So even just speaking in my own little corner of the world, I think there's, cons need to have policies on how to handle things like this. I think, this was just an experience I had over the past year. I think there needs to be, when you're having panels for cons, there needs to be a bit more training and understanding of the role of a moderator in shutting down some of this stuff. There needs to be an understanding in conventions about not putting all white people or all men on a panel. That should just be like a basic stop point. So it's making spaces like this, I think, a huge problem. Unfortunately, this is something I've had some experience with. The internet can be a very dangerous place for women. I don't know how we fix that, because none of the platforms that we use seem to really care and don't seem to think it's a problem if you get a rape threat or, a threat against your family, and it's fine. They didn't, it's not actionable.
But they didn't really mean it. They just made a comment online.
Yeah, exactly. It's fine. Give me my address. So I think, I don't know how you fix things like that. That's a huge thing. And I think it's, demanding accountability. Do we all leave Twitter? Is that even something that could happen? But I think it's, safety is a huge issue, and it's not going away anytime soon. It's only getting worse, unfortunately. And I think it's something that everybody needs to be a bit more responsible for and demand responsibility for. And maybe have some of the corporations that are running our lives, step it up a bit.
Okay. Okay, I think we're sort of running out of time a little, but I'm gonna try and squeeze in one last fan question.
Yeah. I've got a couple of time for more.
Okay, let me ask while they come in. So parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. Now, you yourself are a parent. What do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations, and to get boys involved in helping to do this?
I think your second question answered your first question.
Okay.
And yes, again, it's just not putting the onus just on girls. And that's exactly it. I mean, we've been teaching girls for generations how to keep themselves safe and what to do, often in ways that are incredibly restrictive and offensive, and curtailing their lives so that they don't distract boys. So I think the onus needs to be on boys and what we can teach our sons to do. But even it's interesting, myself, I have my daughter is 5, and it's interesting and kind of disheartening that I saw how quickly, once she entered, just even going to the public school system, picking up on these things, these different boys are this, girls are this, we like this, they like that. And, you can combat that as a parent, but it was shocking to me how quickly that started. Whereas, like when she was 3.5, nothing of that. And into public school, into society, and this immediately starts. Yeah. So I think it's something we all need to be more aware of and teach better respect in terms of treating each other.
Yeah, it's kind of strange when you think about it, how we so very easily and without thinking sort of gender our toys and our clothes and the things that we're supposed to like and the things that because I remember when I was very young, I have 2 brothers, and they would play with cars and like remote control cars and build Lego stuff, and I want to do that too because it's cool. And I remember comments from aunties or like random people saying, "Oh, why are you playing with cars? Don't you have Barbies?" Why can't I do both? You know? Yeah,
I know. I mean, I think
yeah.
it started with like, I had, you know, when my daughter was born, I was fortunate that I had a lot of hand-me-downs and I needed them. We did not have money and they were boys' clothes and I got it from my family and they were like, why are you putting her in that? I'm like, because she's an infant. Like, first of all, it wouldn't matter anyway. Definitely doesn't matter now. They're basically all the same. They're like, you know, they're this size. Humans come in this size and there's no difference. But it was like just early and like my family knows them can be a little bit radical and obnoxious. I don't think I'm obnoxious on certain political points. They do. You know, they're like, oh, you're the radical liberal. You have all these ideas. But you know, it was interesting just how free people said things like that, and it was like, you know, you start to think we're making a difference, and then you know, you just I live in New York City. I mean, my kid goes to a public school in New York City. Like we live in you know blue country, and she's still being told these things about gender and all this stuff. You know, so my family does not come from necessarily that same idea, but you know, it was the idea of like just how you know people stick to these things about gender and about expectations, and it starts so young.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so before we wrap up, I'm gonna ask one final question from a fan. I'm sorry, guys, if we can't get to all of your questions, and maybe a bit later I might have a few minutes to read out some comments because there were quite a lot of comments.
Sure.
Okay, so a final question from Kenzie Lyons. Did you do a lot of research to build the world of Daevabad in Egypt and make sure that the world and clothing and everything along with it was represented correctly? The world felt so incredibly vivid to me, even when I've never been to that part of the world. And I just like to see cultures. Oh, I just see cultures not represented correctly within literature.
When I was in Egypt, no, because I was not writing a book at that time. That was a time where I was still going to be like, I'm going to go to graduate school. But what helped start that was just the process. You know, it was when I was in Egypt and taking the kind of classes that I did that I kind of zeroed in on the medieval world, on the idea of trade links between Egypt and the Indian Ocean. And that kind of got me into reading those sources. So absolutely helped with that. And what also helped with that was building the idea of the chapters we do see in Egypt. I wanted to have a feel for the kinds of buildings and everything that would have been there in the 1800s. So it was kind of fortunate that one of the classes I took was this great history of architecture and art. And our professor had a lot of opinions. And rightfully so, she had a lot of opinions on what all of the different foreign conquerors had done to her country. And she would basically take us to all these sites, which was great because I got to see things that I don't really know we were supposed to go and see, and just get the perspective. You know, she was one of those teachers who she spoke and you could just see it in your mind. It just kind of came to life, and the way she described things. And I think I was able to take those elements. And I did have one of her sort of points was she thought that the Ottomans had basically done nothing in terms of arts and architecture in Egypt, that they didn't keep anything up, that they took everything and spent it on, you know, on their stuff back home. So I did have the line in there that Nahri says at a certain point that they weren't keeping up the cemetery, as a nod to my old professor. But that helps with that. I mean, in terms of, it's interesting because I do get questions. They're like, oh, did studying abroad, you know, for 8 months help you do cultural representation? No, and it shouldn't. If you're going to be the writer, it's like, I studied abroad for 6 months, so now I can write all about this culture and these people. No, I studied abroad, and I'm like, okay, I know a lot about how minarets would have looked at that point, and it helped me find the books that I can go then and read. That doesn't be like, I studied that and now I know everything at all points and can write contemporary and old and all of these things. So it helped me with sourcing and with history, but that's about it.
Okay, cool. A comment from me. So I live in Malaysia, where we have a long colonial history, and reading your books where you mention all these, you know, the bits about colonials and how sometimes they do great stuff, and sometimes they just like leave. They just kind of leave and leave a mess behind and everything. That really struck true with me, and I've experienced. We see that every day here, and you know, people don't realize what a very long impact it has, a very long-term impact. The small little things have like that. Yeah, I mean, we have amazing architecture, you know, wonderful history, but we also have some not so great stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
A comment from Jasmine Nayak, who we were talking earlier about romance. She says, as someone who identifies as demisexual, I like the slow burn versus the ones that are built on communication errors and aggression. And Zaina Rehan said, oh, thank God you brought up that older violent man and young girl trope. It hurts my soul. I think we're all kind of sick of that one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if investigated and everything, it turns good. But there's been some books where I've just been like, oh, this is going to be the book that turns that over, and it does not. And it's just kind of like, why? So,
yeah, again, why? Okay, so, we have been talking for more than an hour, believe it or not. So I'm going to ask my very last question, my last two questions. And we ask this to all our authors. It's kind of a bit of a Captain Obvious question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. You have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work in general. Could you tell us why do you support the cause to end violence against women, and what do you think authors such as yourself could do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
I mean, I think the first question is kind of simple, and it would be more like, why would you not support getting rid of violence against women? It's the right moral stand to take because violence against women is abominable and it has plagued our society and ruined our society and done so many terrible things. Patriarchy has a long, speaking of things that have a long traumatic cost. So yes, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody should be working to end violence against women. And I think it would just go back to that idea of being a storyteller, especially being a storyteller in kind of, the world where you're putting your work out to be read. Think about what you're putting out in this world. I mean, we all have our things and our loves and that character, that scene that we love and we think is crucial to the plot. And if something is a voice in your head is going, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. If readers are saying that, if some of your early editors are saying, I don't know, listen to that voice. Sometimes it's really helpful to kind of double think. It's okay to feel uncomfortable and go, am I the right person to say this, do this, sit with that discomfort, and then think about what you're going to do with the stories that you're putting into the world. You need to remember we are all readers and we love reading things, and what we read resonates and stays and can be deep. Your book could be the first time somebody reads something like that. It could be the book they read after surviving something like that. Try to balance creative freedom with responsibility.
Okay, that's a great answer. Okay, thank you, Shannon, for answering all the questions and being really frank and honest with us. So that kind of brings us to the end of the session. I'm going to put myself back on screen for a little while. Hi, guys. So now, as mentioned earlier, Shannon very generously donated some really awesome and fabulous, amazing goodies. In two bundles. The first bundle has already been snapped up by Ariella Noth. I'm just going to tell you what Ariella Noth got. She got the Devabad Goodie Bundle, which contains one City of Brass hardcover book signed and personalized, and one signed and personalized Kingdom of Copper hardcover book, and a swag set with a bookmark, signed bookplate, a tattoo, a temporary tattoo, and a character poster. It's not like Shannon's going to go over to your house and tattoo you.
I'm going to show up at your apartment with tattoos on.
That'd be so cool, though. But still available for donors worldwide. Anywhere you are in the world, you can get your hands on this. Is the City of Brass Goodie Bundle, which contains a special edition paperback of the City of Brass, a signed and personalized copy. And this special edition has a bonus scene in it, and one accompanying bookmark chosen by Shannon. So there's only one of these bundles left, so please do donate and get it. We also have a lot of other author goodies up on our Rally Up page. We have stuff from Tananarive Dew, Alma Alexander, Caroline Kepnes, Alison Goodman, Mary San Giovanni, lots more. So we're going to be putting new goodies up as well every week throughout March as the campaign gets underway. So let's see if I can share with you guys a little slide. Okay, wait. Hold on. It will be very helpful if I actually open the slide. Okay, here you go. Right, there you are. I hope you all can see that. So go to our Rally Up page. The link is bit.ly/r4p Rally Up IWD 2019. Our chat box moderators are going to put the link up in the chat box as well, so you can just easily click on that and go and look at all the goodies and see what you want. If you want to find out more about Read for Pixels, go to our upcoming Hangouts with more authors. Go to bit.ly/read4pixels. And if you want to find out more about the Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign, about violence against women, what you can do to help end it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Remember, all of the funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. So please, if you can, do give generously. And that's it, actually. So I think that's final words from Shannon. Shannon, maybe do you have any announcements to make? Anywhere you're going to be? Any book signings? Any things coming up?
I am working on book 3, The Empire of Gold, now, and we're hoping to have it out in 2020. In terms of where I'm going to be, I will be at C2E2 in Chicago. I think it's in March. I will be at the Ottawa International Writers Festival in April, May, something like that. And in June, I'll be at the New York Public Library. I'm going to Worldcon in Dublin this year. If you're going to be in Ireland this summer. Otherwise, you can find me online, and I always like hearing from fans. So, and if you want to send me fan mail, I have it on my website. If you want to talk to me on Twitter, I am there. I'm not there right now because I'm technically supposed to be on a break while writing, but anything, I'll be there. And thank you for coming and participating in this. It means a lot to me that people are supporting projects like this. So thank you.
And thank you very much, Shannon, for spending your time with us and answering all the questions. And thanks again, viewers. Yeah. So yeah, Shannon and I are going to say goodbye to everybody, wherever you are in the world. Good night, good evening, whatever. Bye.
Goodbye.